What up, my freaks? RuinousInsight here, back with my quick and dirty guide to chaos. This time we are on to the Battlecruisers. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but one interesting, I suppose, lore tidbit is that many of the chaos Battlecruisers, quote-unquote, are not actually Battlecruisers. They are heavy cruisers. Most of the true battlecruisers came about and replaced the vast majority of the heavy cruisers and grand cruisers in the Imperial domain. That's why you see the Imperial Grand Cruisers. A lot of them are actually old ships, and not the good kind of old, more like the experimental, post-Horus Heresy, not so great kind of old. Anyway, to be fair, the line is a little bit murky with regards to heavy or armored cruisers, as they can sometimes be called battle cruisers, depending solely on the number of guns that they can field while maintaining cruiser speed and maneuverability. It's a fine line. A lot of the older heavy and grand cruisers present in the Chaos fleet, and I mean, let's be real, all of the different ship tonnages are ones that were considered either outdated or were failed experiments, consequently leading their crews to turn to chaos for one reason or another, as well they should. Anyway, in this game in Battlefleet Gothic, the Chaos Battlecruisers have two of the most important ships to the Chaos roster, being the Ashram and the Styx. Now, one thing to keep in mind, the Battlecruisers have to be considered together with their cruiser rivals, as they share a lot of the stats. For one, they do share the exact same speed and they share the exact same toughness. The battlecruisers do get a little bit more troops, being 13 over 12, though I will grant you that's not much of a difference. They also get 3 more anti-ordnance turrets, 15 over 12. And more weaponry for the increased cost, the weaponry being, of course, the hallmark of what makes a battlecruiser different from a cruiser. Now, all 4 of the Chaos battlecruisers have at least some lance turrets as well. I believe the Hecate has only the 1 lance turret, whereas all the others have 2, in addition to plenty of other turrets. This makes it so all the Chaos battlecruisers are significantly better at range than the cruisers. They work better as snipers, they work better as kiters. That's their whole shtick, I suppose you'd say. Now, that being said, while they are better at range, they are about the same in close range brawl. Their boarding capabilities are exactly the same as the cruisers. There is no difference there, and therefore if your only goal is a boarding type ship in the lower chaos tonnages, there is not really any reason to pay the battle cruiser premium for that sort of thing. These things are just as fragile as cruisers after all. I think Chaos as a whole doesn't really have a good damage sponge frontline type ship until you hit the Grand Cruisers, as the lower tonnages are all rather fragile and do sacrifice toughness for speed, suffer a crit to their engines, and they lose a lot of their value, so good luck in close quarters against Orcs or Imperials, or in mid-range against Necrons, just as some examples. Alright, let's move on to the ships. We are starting with the Ashram over here. Now, the Ashram is objectively a great ship. Look at all those damn lances. It is Chaos's best known dedicated kiting lance boat, and probably the best lance boat in the entire game. It's got 4 long-range lance batteries, rather, the opposite of macros, and 2 long-range lance turrets on top of that, with an additional 2 mid-range macro turrets to shake things up a little bit. Not entirely sure why the designers thought that this thing needed macros on it at all. I would have stuck more lances on it in the same way that the Carnage has tons and tons of macros, but hey, whatever. That's just fine. Anyway, what this means is that the Ashram, as long as you have spotters in numbers, can crit all the enemy ships' subsystems as they close the distance, and maintain that distance for a good long while with its combination of speed and turret-enhancing kiting capabilities. Do keep in mind that those lance turrets are better than macro turrets because they have that 100% accuracy in the 270 degrees and do not suffer from the accuracy malus. Now, the Ashram is also very cheap in terms of cost. It comes in at only 2 216 fleet points. This thing is aggressively priced, folks, so get yours in your fleet today. But wait, there's more. If you act now, we are offering a limited edition blasphemous icon, a 4 sacrifice value, absolutely free. I amuse myself. Alright, that's enough of that. Anyway, insofar as you consider lances to be effective, and they are probably more effective in the campaign than they are in the multiplayer, depending on the fleets you're up against, the Ashram is always a very competitive addition to any Chaos fleet. Now, next up, we are going to move on to the Hades, the first of the situational, I suppose you'd say, battle cruisers. If you take a look at the loadout of this thing, you will notice that the Hades is identical to the Murder Cruiser. It is the exact same thing. A double-barrel heavy lance artillery, macro battery weapons. It's basically the Murder, except it has an additional 2 lance turrets basically welded onto it. I suppose the Hades, you could say, exemplifies what it is to be a battle cruiser. It's a Murder Cruiser with some extra guns on it. Now, coming in at an increased 22 points over the Murder for these 2 lance turrets isn't actually too bad. You have to remember that these are lance turrets, long range, they will output constant DPS and fire in all directions. That's very, very nice and keeps the Hades much more viable in long range than its counterpart, the Murder. Now, these points in terms of the lance turrets also add up in being able to output, or rather add, about 1.5 times as much damage to the 90-degree frontal firing arc of the heavy lance artillery, but can also obviously turn and fire everywhere else. It's also only 3 more points, I believe, than the Slaughter. Yes, it is only 3 more points, so it's slower than the Slaughter, but it does significantly outperform it in range and in a brawl, and in consistent DPS efficiency due to the lance turrets. So if you're considering a Slaughter for whatever reason, there may be good reason to consider your Hades as well. Now, some people used to say that Hades was kind of a garbage pick back in the day, but in the current iteration of the game, at its current cost, I'm not entirely sure I agree. At only 190 points, it is a pretty decent, not best, but decent choice if you need a relatively cheap sacrificial line ship to be out in front of your fleet that can still do some fairly okay damage at long range, can kite a little bit, and still dish out the pain if it were to get into a brawl. It is, after all, named the Hades, so keeping that in mind, you should heed it and send it to Hades in your battles. Now, do remember that other ships can do its job better, or at cheaper cost. However, it's still a decent ship, just a little bit more situational than the Styx or the Ashram. Now, speaking of the Styx, we are going to move on to that, and it is a very special battlecruiser that Chaos is known for, as it has a whopping 4 triangular launch bays in the battlecruiser tonnage. The Styx is a fragile true carrier, as suffering crits on its launch bays can cripple its DPS, kind of like the Hellbringer Mark I, I suppose, but it has absolutely no broadside weaponry to speak of. Instead, this thing boasts a beautiful 4 long-range turrets, 2 of which are lance turrets, but all of them rated at 1800 units. That is a kiting ship if I've ever seen one. As similar to the Ashram, it can kite for days, but unlike the Ashram, the Styx stinks. The Styx does not stink. Is essentially 100% efficient at 270 degrees all the damn time. That really adds up, as it can kite and face any direction without needing to consider broadside orientation at all. You don't really care much about which way this thing is facing. So as you may have guessed, this makes it always a great addition to your fleet, and there's really not that much to say about it. It's just that good, people. Now, on to the Hecate, the new battle cruiser on the block, and I think it does bear some deconstruction in that regard. Now, this is more of a combat carrier or possibly sniper carrier, depending on what kind of role you're putting it in. It frankly kind of toes the line between the two. Now, it is very similar to the Devastation Battlecruiser in terms of loadout, but I would consider it to be, for its cost, more of a second line ship as opposed to a support ship. It's not quite the same as the Devastation, as while it does boast 2 launch bays, its single lance turret, its broadside macros, and its other 2 macro turrets, I believe, yes, 2 macro turrets, are all rated at the impressive 18,000 range. So without the short-range macro turrets that are present on the Devastation, it makes for a better sniper and kiter, allowing for a longer engagement range and choosing your engagement range at relative weapon efficiency. Though you do have to keep in mind that all of the macro weapons will fall off, so you have to keep it in lock-on, or else its accuracy is pretty dismal at range in that regard. Now, the fact that it does have so many macro weapons also allows it to toe that line with being a combat carrier that the Devastation doesn't really pull off. Macros being better at close range, if you get into close range and switch it into reload, its macro weapons should allow it to output a fairly decent amount of DPS. It can certainly go into a brawl and maintain respectable damage output, as its damage will ramp up as the enemy closes the distance. However, as I've already said, using it as a line ship remains kind of iffy, due to it being rather fragile. It seems to be a decent choice for, as I said, a second line ship, i.e. keep it between the damage sponges and the kiting snipers. It can still fire from long range and snipe relatively okay with its macros, not to the degree that a land sniper can do, but it can still toe the line. It is more of a jack of all trades, basically. That's the phrase I was looking for. Jack of all trades, master of none. Thus, the Hecate is not a complete requirement in your fleet, but still a decent pickup. Personally, I think that the Devastation, for its cost with its 2 launch bays, is a better choice for a support ship. So the Hecate is only needed if you need a second line in your fleet, because some fleets will only run with 2 lines, i.e. a front line and a secondary and a back line. But if you're going for more advanced tactics, I suppose you'd say, with front line dying and then the second line engaging, so on and so forth, then the Hecate is always an option. Anyway, to conclude about the battlecruisers, you will never go wrong in fielding a Styx or an Ashram in your fleet, in my opinion. These are 2 chaos bread and butter ships for kiting, with either ordnance or lances as you prefer, and plenty of turrets stuck on every which way. They can very well, the Ashram and the Styx rather, form the bulk of your fleets, and you will maintain a very decent competitive track record, particularly even if you're mediocre at the whole kiting shtick. They are very efficient at what they do. The other 2 choices do remain viable, however, but situational, as they fill needs that may or may not be there in your fleet. They have cons that do balance out their pros, I suppose you'd say, so it does depend on your fleet composition. So that is it for the Chaos Battlecruisers. Next time we will be moving on to the pocket battleships, or grand cruisers as they are known. So as always, don't forget to support your friendly neighborhood heretic with a like and comment, and thanks for watching.